In this video, we'll take a look at the encoder modes available in MXT-Live. There are 6 encoder modes that you can switch between by holding down Select and using the first 6 display buttons. Each encoder mode dictates the functionality of the encoders, as well as the Browse, Sampling, and All buttons. All of the encoder modes that control parameters share some of the same functionality in common. First of all, the display button over each encoder offers some additional functionality for that encoder. The first is related to overdubbing automation. By default, if I try to change a portion of this envelope with overdubbing, it's going to end up erasing a portion of the envelope. And I'll just undo that. If I hold down the corresponding display button, automation will only be recorded while I'm holding the button down. When the erase button is held down, pressing a display button will clear automation recorded for the associated parameter from the selected clip. And finally, when Shift is held down, the display buttons will reset parameter values back to their default value. Global mode provides access to global settings that are primarily useful in arrangement view. The first encoder rewinds and fast forwards by 1 beat. When Shift is held down, it rewinds and fast forwards by 1 bar. The next encoder navigates between locators. When Shift is held down, it can add or remove locators. The next encoder controls arrangement loop start in 1 beat increments, or 1 bar increments if Shift is held down. The next encoder controls arrangement loop length in 1 beat increments, or 1 bar increments if Shift is held down. The next encoder will turn arrangement loop on and off. The next encoder will horizontally zoom in or out. The next encoder will vertically zoom in or out on the selected track. When Shift is held down, it'll vertically zoom all tracks. And the last encoder controls global groove amount. The Browse and Sampling buttons toggle punch in and out respectively. And the All button is not used in this mode. Track mode provides control over the selected track via 2 submodes that you can switch between with the Browse and Sampling buttons. Both of these submodes show an output meter for the track in the last section of the display. In the default submode, you can control the track's volume, pan, and first 5 sends. By default, the encoders offer relatively coarse adjustment. When Shift is held down, they'll offer finer adjustment. In the I/O submode, you can control the track's input routing, input subrouting, output routing, output subrouting, monitoring status, and crossfade assignment. Clip mode provides control over the selected clip via 2 submodes that you can switch between with the Browse and Sampling buttons. In the default submode, you can control basic settings of the clip. The first encoder controls the start marker. This and the next 4 encoders are quantized. You can adjust the quantization to use with the last encoder. This allows you to do coarse or fine adjustment. Also, when Shift is held down, the encoders offer coarser adjustment relative to the selected quantization. The next encoder controls the end marker. The next encoder controls loop start. The next encoder controls loop end. The next encoder controls detuning. The next encoder controls transpose. And the 7th encoder controls gain. The Note Edit submode allows you to edit note events in MIDI clips. 2 types of editing is provided, Event Edit and Range Edit. You can toggle between those with the Sampling button. In Event Edit, you'll edit 1 note event at a time. You can select the event to edit with the first encoder. By default, this will navigate through events based on their position. With the Sort By encoder, you can change this so instead you navigate based on pitch. You can also select events by using the step sequencing functionality in Note mode. Holding down Select and pressing a step will select that step for editing. Also, adding steps will automatically select the step for editing. Once an event is selected, you can edit it with the other encoders. The second encoder will adjust the event's pitch. By default, this and the other encoders offer relatively fine adjustment. When Shift is held down, they offer coarser adjustment. The next encoder adjusts the event's position. This and the next encoder are quantized. You can select the quantization to use with the last encoder. This allows you to do coarse or fine adjustment. The next encoder controls the event's length. The next encoder controls the event's velocity. And the next encoder can mute or unmute the event. When the Shift button is held down, the All button will add an event. When Erase is held down, the All button will delete the selected event. In Range Edit, you can edit ranges of events. The first 2 encoders adjust the pitch range, and the second 2 encoders adjust the position range. You can also select ranges by using the step sequencing functionality in Note mode. Once a range is selected, you can edit it with the 7th encoder. The Type encoder allows you to choose the type of editing to perform. When the Erase button is held down, the All button will delete all the events in the range. Device mode allows you to control the parameters of the selected device. By default, the encoders offer relatively coarse adjustment. When Shift is held down, they offer finer adjustment. If the device has more than 8 parameters, you can use the sampling and browse buttons to navigate between banks of 8 parameters. When Shift is held down, the browse and sampling buttons can be used for navigating between devices. If the selected device is a rack, you can navigate between the rack's chains with the browse and sampling buttons. The All button will toggle the device on and off. When Shift is held down, the All button will lock to or unlock from the selected device. And when Erase is held down, the All button will delete the selected device. In drum mode, you can control the mixer settings of the selected drum rack pad. You can select pads with the last encoder, or with the pads in note mode. Once a pad is selected, you can control its volume, pan, and first 5 sends. By default, the encoders offer relatively coarse adjustment. When Shift is held down, they offer finer adjustment. The Browse button will toggle the pad's mute switch, and if held down, it offers momentary control. When Shift is held down, the Browse button will unmute all drum rack pads. The Sampling button will toggle the pad's solo switch, and when held down, it offers momentary control. When Shift is held down, the Sampling button will unsolo all drum rack pads. When Erase is held down, the All button will delete the drum rack. In MIDI mode, the encoders send common MIDI messages that are useful when working with MIDI instruments. In this first example, I'm using the motif rack. The last encoder sends program change messages, which can be used for navigating between an instrument's presets. The Browse and Sampling buttons send program change messages incrementally, so these can be used for navigating between patches one by one. If the instrument has more than 128 patches, you can use the bank encoders for navigating between banks of patches. The other encoders here all send MIDI messages that are associated with common parameters. So you've got volume, pan, filter cutoff, filter resonance, and amp envelope attack. In this example, I'm using Reactor. And again, I can use the program change functionality to navigate between patches. Reactor doesn't natively respond to the MIDI messages these other encoders send. However, it includes a MIDI learn mode, as many plugins do, so I can use that to learn the encoders to parameters in Reactor. For example, I'll learn the cutoff encoder to the cutoff parameter in Reactor.